Passing of time did not sweep away the superstitious fear that Swin despised. He was angry and anxious, eager that White Fell should return and merely by her bright, gracious presence reinstate herself in favor, but doubtful if all his authority and example could keep her from notice an altered aspect of welcome. And he foresaw clearly that Christian would prove unmanageable and might be capable of some dangerous outbreak. For a time, the twins' variance was marked, on Swin's part by an air of rigid indifference, on Christian's by heavy, downcast silence, and a nervous, apprehensive observation of his brother. Superadded to his remorse and foreboding, Swin's displeasure weighed upon him intolerably, and the remembrance of their violent rupture was a ceaseless misery. The elder brother, self-efficient and insensitive, could little know how deeply his unkindness stabbed. A depth and force of affection such as Christian's was unknown to him. The loyal subservience that he could not appreciate had encouraged him to domineer. His strenuous opposition to his reason and will was accounted as furious malice, if not sheer insanity. Christian surveillance galled him incessantly, and embarrassment and in danger he foresaw as the outcome. Therefore, that suspicion might be lulled, he judged it wise to make overture for peace. Most easily done. A little kindliness, a few evidences of consideration, a slight return of the old. Oh, lovely. See, here we are with this thing again. Continuing, sorry about that. Christian's surveillance galled him incessantly, and embarrassment and danger he foresaw as the outcome. Therefore, that suspicion might be lulled, he judged it wise to make overtures of peace. Most easily done. A little kindness, a few evidence of consideration, a slight return of the older brotherly imperiousness. And Christian replied by a gratefulness and relief that might have touched him had he understood all, but instead increased his secret contempt. Most easily done, a little kindness, a few evidences of consideration, a slight return of the brotherly imperiousness, and Christian relied upon a grateful and relief that might have touched him had he understood all, but instead increased his secret contempt. So successful was this finesse that when late on a day a message summoning Christian to a distance was transmitted by Swin, no doubt of its genuineness occurred. When his errand proved useless, he set out to return. Mistake or misapprehension was all that he surmised. Not till he sighted the homestead lying low between the gray light snow ridges that did vivid recollection of the time when he had tracked that horror to the door, roused an intense dread, and with it a hardly defined suspicion. His grasp tightened on the bear spear that he carried as a staff, every sense alert, every muscle strung. Excitement urged him on, caution checked him, and the two governed his long strides swiftly and noisily to the climax he felt was at hand. As he drew near to the outer gates, a light shadow steered and went, as though the gray of the snow had taken detached motion. A darker shadow stayed and faced Christian, striking his lifeblood chill with utmost despair. Schwinn stood before him, and surely the shadow that went was White Fell. They had been together, close. Had she not been in his arms near enough for lips to meet? There was no moon, but the stars gave light enough to show Schwinn's face was flushed and elate. The flush remained, though the expression changed quickly at sight of his brother. How if Christian had been all should one of his frenzied outbursts he met and managed by resolution, by indifference? He halted between the two, and as a result, he swaggered. White fell, questioned Christian, hoarse and breathless. Yes. Schwinn's answer was a query with an intonation that implied he was clearing the ground for action. From Christian came, "Have you kissed her?" like a bolt direct, staggering Schwinn by his sheer prompt timidity. He flushed, yet darker, and yet half smiled over his earnestness of success he had won. Had there been really between him and Christian the rivalry that he imagined? His face had enough of the insolence of triumph to exasperate jealous rage. "You dare ask this?" "Schwinn, oh Schwinn, I must know you have," asked Christian. The ring of despair and anguish in his tone angered Schwinn, misconstruing it. Jealousy urging to such presumption was intolerable. "Mad fool," he said, constraining himself no longer. "Win for yourself a woman to kiss. Leave mine without question. Such a one as I should desire to kiss is such a one as shall never allow a kiss to you." Then Christian fully understood his supposition. I I cried, "White fell, that deadly thing, Schwinn. Are you blind and mad? I would save you from her. A werewolf! She's a werewolf!" Schwinn maddened again at the accusation, a dastardly way of revenge, as he conceived, and instantly, for the second time, the brothers were at strife violently. But Christian was now too desperate to be scrupulous, for a dim glimpse had shot a possibility into his mind, and to be free to follow it, the striking of his brother was a necessity. Thank God he was armed, and so Schwinn's equal. Facing his assailant with the beer spear, he struck up his arms and with the butt hit hard so that it fell. The matchless runner leapt away on the instant to follow a forlorn hope. Schwinn, on regaining his feet, was amazed, as angry at this accountable flight. He knew in his heart that his brother was no coward, and that it was unlike him to shrink from an encounter became defeat was because defeat was certain, and cruel humiliation from a vindictive victor probable. Of the of the uselessness of pursuit he was well aware. He must abide his chagrin, content to know that his time for advantage would come. Since White Fell had parted to the right, Christian to the left, the event of a subsequent encounter did not occur to him. And now Christian, acting on the dim glimpse he had had just as Schwinn turned upon him of something that moved against the sky along the ridge behind the homestead, was taking his only hope on a chance, his own superlative speed. If what he saw was really White Fell, he guessed she was bending her steps toward the open waste, and there was just a possibility that by a straight dash and a desperate, perilous leap over a sheer bluff, he might yet meet her on ahead of her, and then he had no further thoughts of how to deal with it. In the past, the quick, fierce race and the chance of death at the leap, and he halted in a hollow to fetch his breath and to look. Did she come? Had she gone? She came. She came with a smooth, gliding, noiseless speed that was neither walking nor running. Her arms were folded in her furs that were drawn tight about her body. The white lappets from her head were wrapped and knotted closely beneath her face. Her eyes were set on a far distance. So she went till the evening away of her going was startled by a pause by Christian. Fell! She drew a quick, sharp breath at the sound of her name thus mutilated, and faced Schwinn's brother. Her eyes glittered, her upper lip was lifted and showed the teeth, and half of her name, impressed with an ominous sense as uttered by him, warned her of the respect of a deadly foe. Yet she cast loose her robes till they trailed ample, and spoke as a mild woman. What would you? Then Christian answered with his solemn, dreadful accusation. You kissed Rawl, and now Rawl is dead. You kissed Trella, and now she is dead. You have kissed Schwinn, my dear brother, but he shall not die. He added, You may live till midnight. The edge of the teeth and the glitter of the eyes stayed a moment, and her right hand also slid down to the axe heft. Then, without a word, she swerved from him and sprang out and away swiftly over the snow. And Christian sprang out and away and followed her swiftly over the snow, keeping behind but a half stride's length from her side. So they went running together, silent, towards the vast wastes of snow, where no living thing but they two moved under the stars of night. Never before had Christian so rejoiced in his powers. The gift of speed and the training of use and endurance were priceless to him now. Though midnight was hours away, he was confident that go where that fell thing would, hasten as she would, she could not outstrip him, nor escape from him. Then, when the time for transformation had come, when the woman's form made no longer a shield against a man's hand, he would slay or be slain to save Schwinn. He had struck his dear brother a dire extremity, but he would not, though reason urged, strike a woman. For 1 mile, for 2 miles they ran, White Fell ever foremost, Christian ever at equal distance from her side, so near that now and again her outflying furs touched him. She spoke no word, nor he. She never turned her head to look at him, nor skewed to evade him, but with set face looking forward sped straight on, over rough, over smooth, aware of his nearness by the regular beat of his feet and the sound of his breath behind her. In a while she quickened her pace. From the first, Christian had judged of her speed as admirable, yet with exulting security in his own, excelling and enduring whatever her efforts. But when the pace increased, he found himself put to the test as never before had been in any race. Her feet, indeed, flew faster than his. It was only by his length of stride that he kept his pace at her side. But his heart was high and resolute. He did not fear failure yet. So the desperate race flew on. Their feet struck up the powdery snow. Their breath smoked into the sharp, clear air, and they were gone before the air was cleared of snow and vapor. Now and then Christian glanced up to judge, by the rising of the stars, of the coming of midnight. So long, so long. Whitefell held on without slack. She was evident with confidence in her speed proving matchless, as resolute to outrun her pursuer as he to endure to midnight and fulfill his purpose. And Christian held on, still self assured. He could not fail, he would not fail. To avenge Rawl and Trella was motive enough for him to do what man could do, but for Schwinn more. She had kissed Schwinn, but he should not die too. With Schwinn to save, he could not fail. Never before was such a race as this. No, not when in old Greece man and maid raced together with two fates at stake, for the hard running was sustained unabated, while star after star rose and went wheeling up towards midnight. For 1 hour, then 2 hours. Then Christian saw and heard what shot him through with fear. Where a fringe of trees hung round a slope, he saw something dark moving, and heard a yelp, followed by a full hard cry, and the dark spread out upon the snow, a pack of wolves in pursuit. Of the beast alone he had little cause for fear. At the pace he held he could distance them, 4-footed though they were. But at Whitefell's wiles he had infinite apprehension, for how might she not avail herself of the savage jaws of these wolves, akin as they were to half her nature? She vouchsafed to them nor look nor sign, but Christian, on an impulse to assure himself that she would not escape him, caught and held the back-flung edge of her furs that were running still. She turned like a flash with a beastly snarl, teeth and eyes gleaming again. Her axe shone on the upstroke, on the downstroke, as she hacked at his hand. She had lopped it off at the wrist, but that he parried with the bear spur, the beer spear. Even then, she shore through the shaft and shattered the bones of the hand at the same elbow, so that he loosed perforce. Then again they raced on as before, Christian not losing a pace, though his left hand had swung useless, bleeding and broken. The snarl, indubitably, though modified by a woman's organs, the vicious fury revealed in teeth and eyes, the sharp, arrogant pain of her maiming blow, caught away Christian's heed of the beast behind by striking into him close, vivid realization of the infinitely greater danger that ran before him in that deadly thing. When he bethought him to look behind, lo, the pack had but reached their tracks and instantly slunk aside, cowed, the yell of pursuit changing to whelps and whinnies. So abhorrent was that fell creature to beast and as to man. She had drawn her furs more closely to her, disposing them so that instead of flying loose at her heels, no drapery hung lower than her knees, and this without a check to her wonderful speed, nor embarrassment by the cumbering of the folds. She held her head as before, her lips were firmly set. Only the tense nostrils gave her breath, not a sign of distress witness to the long sustaining of that terrible speed. But on Christian, by now the strain was telling palpably. His head weighed heavy, and his breath came laboring in great sobs. The bear spear would have been a burden now. His heart was beating like a hammer, but such a dullness oppressed his brain that it was only by degree he could realize his helpless state, wounded and weaponless, chasing that terrible thing. That was a fierce, desperate, axe-armed woman, except she should assume the beast with fangs yet more formidable. And still the far, slow stars went lingering nearly an hour from midnight. So far was his brain astray that an impression took him that she was fleeing from the midnight stars, whose gain was by such low degrees that a time equaling days and days had gone on in the race round the northern circle of the world. Days and days as long might last before the end, except she slackened or except he failed. But he could not fail yet. He had to save Christian, or he had to save Schwind, his brother. How long had he been praying so? He had started with a self confidence and reliance that had felt no need for that aid, and now it seemed the only means by which to restrain his heart from swelling beyond the compass of his body, by wish to cherish his brain from dwindling and shriveling quite away. Some sharp-toothed creature kept tearing and dragging on his maimed left hand. He never could see it, he could not shake it off, but he prayed it off at times. The clear stars before him took to shuddering, and he knew why. They shuddered at sight of what was behind him. He had never divined before that strange things hid themselves from men under pretense of being snow-clad mounds or swaying trees, but now they came slipping out from their harmless covers to follow him and mock at his impotence to make a kindred thing resolve to truer form. He knew the air behind him was strong. He heard the hum of innumerable murmurings together, but his eyes could never catch them. They were too swift and nimble. Yet he knew they were there because on a backward glance he saw the snow mounds surge as they groveled, flattening out of sight. He saw the trees reel as they screwed themselves rigid, past recognition among the boughs. And after such glance, the stars for a while returned to steadfastness, and an infinite stretch of silence froze upon the chill gray world, only deranged by the swift even beat of the flying feet, and his own slower from the longer stride and the sound of his breath. And for some clear moments he knew that his only concern was to sustain his speed, regardless of pain and stress. To deny that every nerve he had her power to outstrip him or to widen the pace between them till the stars crept up till midnight. Then out again would come that crowd invisible, humming, hustling behind, dense and dark enough, he knew, to blot out the stars at his back, yet ever skipping and jerking from his sight. A hideous check came to the rest. White fell, swirled about, and leapt to the right, and Christian, unprepared for such a prompting, a lurch, found close to his feet a deep pit yawning, and his own impetus past control. But he snatched at her as he tore past, clasping her right arm with his one whole hand, and the two swung together upon the brink. And her straining away in self-preservation was vigorous enough to counterbalance his headlong impulse and brought them reeling together to safety. Then, before he was verily sure that they were not to perish so, crashing down, he saw gnashing in wild, pale fury as she wrenched to be free, and since her right hand was in his grasp, used her axe left-handed, striking back at him. The blow was effectual enough even so. His right arm dropped powerless, gashed, and with the lesser bone broken, that jarred with hard pain when he let it swing as he leaped out again and ran to recover the few feet she had gained from his pause at the shock. The near escape and this new quick pain made him again every faculty alive and intense. He knew that what he followed was most surely death animate. Wounded and helpless, he was utterly at her mercy if so she should realize and take action. Hopeless to avenge, hopeless to save. His very despair for Swin swept him on to follow, and preceded the kissed doom of death. Could he yet fail to hunt that thing past midnight? Out of the womanly form, alluring and treacherous, into everlasting restraint of the bestial, which was the last shred of hope left from the confident purpose of the onset. Schwinn, Schwinn, oh Schwinn, he thought. He was praying, though his heart swung out nothing but this. Schwinn, Schwinn, oh Schwinn. The last hour from midnight had lost half its quarters, and the stars went lifting up the great minutes, and again his greatening heart and his shrinking brain and the sickening agony that swung at either side conspired to appall the will that had only seeming empire over his feet. Now Whitefell's body was so closely enveloped that not a lap nor an edge of fur flew free. He stretched forward strangely aslant, leaning from the upright poise of a runner. She cleared the ground at times by long bounds, gaining an increase of speed that Christian agonized to equal. Because the stars pointed that the end was nearing, the black broad came behind again and followed noising. Ah, if they could but keep quiet and still, nor slip their unusual harmless mass to encourage with their interest the last speed of their most deadly congener. What shape had they? Should he ever know? If it were but that he was bound to compel the fell thing that ran before him into her truer form, he might face about and follow them. No, no, not so. If he might do anything but what he did, race, race, and racing bear his agony. This would just stand still and die, to be quiet of the pain of breathing. He grew bewildered, uncertain of his own identity, doubting of his own true form. He could not be really a man, no more than that running thing was really a woman. His real form was only hidden under embodiment of a man, but what it was that he did not know, and Schwinn's real form he did not know. Schwinn lay fallen at his feet where he had struck him down, his own brother. He stumbled over him and had to overleap him and race harder because she who had kissed Schwinn leapt so fast. Schwinn, oh Schwinn. Why did the stars stop to shudder? Midnight else had surely come. The leaning, leaping thing looked back at him with a wild, fierce look and laughed in savage scorn and triumph. He saw in a flash why, for within a time measurable by seconds, she would have escaped him utterly. As the land lay, a slope of ice sunk on the one hand, and on the other hand a steep rose. Shouldering forward between the two was space for a foot to be planted, but none for a body to stand. Yet a juniper bough thrusting out gave a handhold secure enough for one with a resolute grasp to swing past the perilous place and pass on safe. Though the first seconds of the last moment were going, she dared to flash back a wicked look at the pursuer who was impotent to grasp. The crisis struck convulsive life into his last supreme effort. His will surged up indomitable. His speed proved matchless yet. He leapt with a rush, passed her before her laugh had time to go out, and turned short, barring the way, and braced to withstand her. She came hurtling, desperate, with a feint to the right hand, and then launched herself upon him with a spring, like a wild beast when it leaps to kill. And he, with one strong arm and a hand that could not hold, with one strong hand and an arm that could not guide and sustain, he caught and held her even so, and they fell together. And because he felt his whole arm slipping and the whole hand loosening to slack the dreadful agony of the wrenched bone above, he caught and held with his teeth the tunic at her knee as she struggled up and swung off his hand to overleap him victoriously and get away. Like lightning, she snatched her axe and struck him on the neck, deep, once, twice, His lifeblood gushed out, staining her feet. The stars touched midnight. The death scream he heard was not his, for his set teeth had hardly yet relaxed when it rang out, and the dreadful cry began with a woman's shriek, but then changed and ended as the yell of a beast. And before the final blank overtook his dying eyes, he saw that she gave place to it. He saw more, that life gave place to death, causelessly and incomprehensibly. For he did not presume that no holy water could be more holy or more potent to destroy an evil thing than the lifeblood of a pure heart poured out for another in free willing devotion. His own true hidden reality that he had desired to know grew palpable, recognizable. It seemed to him just this, a great, glad, abounding hope that he had saved his brother too, expansive to be constrained by the limited form of a sole man. It yearned for an embodiment infinite as the stars. What did it matter to that true reality that the man's brain shrank and shrank till it was nothing, that the man's body could not retain the huge pain of his heart, and it heaved out through that red exit riven at the neck, that the black noise, a lighter pressure on the heels. Unbelievable. Could any woman but Whitefell run so? Could any man but Christian run so? The guess became a certainty. He was following where alone in the dark night Whitefell had fled from Christian pursuing. Such villainy set heart and brain on fire with rage and indignation. Such villainy in his own brother, till lately loveworthy, praiseworthy, though a fool for meekness. He would kill Christian. Had he lives many as the footprints he had trodden, vengeance should demand them all. In a tempest of murderous hate he followed on in haste, for the track was plain enough, starting with such a burst of speed as could not be maintained, but brought him back soon to a plod for the spent, sobbing breath to be regulated. He cursed Christian aloud and called Whitefell's name on high in a frenzied expanse of passion. His grief itself was a rage, being such an intolerable anguish of pity and shame at the thought of his love. Whitefell, who had parted from his kiss, free and radiant, to be hounded straightway by his brother, mad with jealousy, fleeing for more than life while her lover was housed at his ease. If he had but known, he raved in impudent rebellion at the cruelty of events. If he had but known that his strength and love might have availed in her defense, now the only service to her that he could render was to kill Christian. As a woman, he knew she was matchless in speed, matchless in strength, but Christian was matchless in speed among men, not easily to be matched in strength. Brave and swift and strong though she were, what chance had she against a man of his strength and inches, frantic too and intent on hard revenge against his brother, his successful rival? Mile after mile he followed with a bursting heart. More piteous, more tragic seemed the case at his evidence of Whitefell's splendid supremacy, holding her own so long against Christian's famous speed, so long that his love and admiration grew more and more boundless, and his grief and indignation therewith also. Whenever the track lay clear, he ran with such reckless prodigality of strength that it soon was spent, and he dragged on heavily, till sometimes on the ice of a mere, sometimes on a windswept place. All signs were lost, but no undeviating had been their line that a course straight on, and then short questing to either hand recovered them again. Hour after hour had gone by, though more than half that winter day, before ever he came to the place where the trampled snow showed that a scurry of feet had come and gone, wolves' feet, and gone most amazingly. Only a little beyond he came to the loped point of Christian's bear spear. Further on he would see where the remnant of the useless shaft had been dropped. The, the snow here was dashed with blood, and the footsteps of the two had fallen closer together. Some hoarse sound of exultation came from him that might have been a laugh had breath sufficed. "Oh, White Fell, my poor brave love! Well struck!" he groaned, torn by his pity and great admiration for her, as he guessed surely how she had turned and dealt a blow. The sight of the blood inflamed him, as it might a beast that ravens. He grew mad with a desire to have Christian by the throat once again, not to loose him this time till he had crushed out his life, or beat out his life, or stabbed out his life, or all these, and torn him a piecemeal asunder. Aha! And then, not till then, bleed his heart with weeping like a child, like a girl over the piteous fate of his poor lost love. On and on and on through the aching time, toiling and straining in the track of those two superb runners that had gone ahead, aware of the marvel of their endurance, but unaware of the marvel of their speed, that in the 3 hours before midnight had overpassed all that vast distance that he could only traverse from twilight to twilight. For clear daylight was passing when he came to the edge of an old marl pit and saw how the two who had gone before had stamped and trampled together in desperate peril on the verge. And here fresh blood stains spoke to him of a valiant defense against his infamous brother. And he followed where the blood had dripped till the cold had staunched his flow, taking a savage gratification from this evidence that Christian had been gashed deeply, maddening afresh with desire to do likewise more excellently, and so slake his murderous hate. And he began to know that through all his despair he had entertained a germ of hope that grew apace, retained upon his brother's blood. He strove on as best he might, wrung now by an access of hope, now of despair, in agony to reach the end, however terrible, sick with the aching of the toil miles that deferred it. And the light went lingering out of the sky, giving place to uncertain stars. He came to the finish. Two bodies lay in a narrow place. Christian's was one, and the other beyond, not White Fell. There, where the footsteps ended, lay a great white wolf. At the sight, Swin's strength was blasted. Body and soul, he was struck down groveling by the reality. The stars had grown sure and intense before he steered from where he had dropped prone. Very feebly he crawled to his dead brother and laid his hands upon him and touched, so afraid to look or to steer further. Cold, stiff, hours they had been dead. Yet the dead body was his only shelter, and lay in that most dreadful hour. His soul, stripped bare of all skeptic comfort, coward, shivering, naked, abject, and living, clung to the dead out of piteous need for grace from the soul that had passed away. He rose to his knees, lifting the body. Christian had fallen face forward in the snow, with his arms flung up and wide, and so had the frost made him rigid, strange, ghastly, unyielding to Swin's lifting, so that he laid him down again and crouched above, with his arms fast around him, and a low, heart-wrung groan. When at last he found force to raise his brother's body and gather it into his arms, tight clasping to his breast. He tried to face the thing that lay beyond. The sight set his limbs in a palsy with horror and dread. His senses had failed and fainted in utmost cowardice before the strength that came from beholding dead Christian in his arms, enabling him to compel his eyes to endure the sight and to take into the brain the complete aspect of the thing. No wound, only bloodstains on the feet. The great grim jaws had a savage grin, though dead stiff, and his kiss he could bear it no longer, and turned away, nor ever looked again. And the dead man in his arms, knowing the full horror, had followed and faced it for his sake, had suffered agony and death for his sake. In the neck was the deep death gash. One arm and both hands were dark with frozen blood for his sake. Dead he knew him, as in life he had not known him. To give the right need of love and worship, because the outward man lacked perfection and strength equal to his. He had forsaken the love and worship of that great pure heart as his due. He, so unworthy in the inner reality, so mean, so despicable, callous, and contemptuous had he acted toward his brother, who had laid down his life to save him. He longed for utter annihilation, that so he might lose the agony of knowing himself so unworthy of such perfect love. The frozen calm of death on the face appalled him. He dared not touch it with lips that had cursed so lately, with lips fouled by kiss of the horror that had been death. He struggled to his feet, still clasping Christian. The dead man stood upright within his arm, frozen rigid. The eyes were not quite closed. The head had stiffened and bowed slightly to one side. The arms stayed straight and wide. It was the figure of one crucified, the blood-stained hands also forming a cross. So living and dead went back along the track that one had passed in the deepest passion of love and one in the deepest passion of hate. All that night Swin toiled through the snow, bearing the weight of dead Christian, treading back along the steps he before had trodden. When he was wronging with vilest thoughts and cursing with murderous hatred, the brother who all the while lay dead for his sake. Cold, lifeless, darkness encompassed the strong man, bowed with the dolorous burden, and yet he knew surely that night he entered hell and trod hell fire along the homeward road, and endured through it only because Christian was with him. And he knew surely that to him Christian had been as Christ, and had suffered and died to save him from his sins. The end.